Smaller group data is not everyone's cup of tea and favorite topic, I think, but it's really important because we develop the assessment not just to do the assessment. We develop the assessment because it gives you data to use to change outcomes for children. So I hope that other people will watch the presentation, and because we're a small group, please, please, please ask questions. So, were you all here at the last session? Yes? No, you were not at my last session. Okay. Okay, so I won't do all the same intro stuff that I did there. I am going to talk about using the data. I won't do all of the intro to the PELI because that was covered in the overview of the tool itself in the earlier session. This is really going to be the kind of data you get and the kind of decisions you can make and how to actually use the data for making decisions. Again, the whole idea is changing outcomes. You don't just collect it. So I did say, and you heard me say, that I am from Acadience Learning, formerly Dynamic Measurement Group. Prior to that, I was at the University of Oregon. Prior to that, I was at the Capital Area Intermediate Unit 15, and here is proof of that. That was me in the early childhood special ed program up in New Bloomfield, Perry County. I should have shown this photo in the last session when I had a room full of people, and I decided to stick it into the second presentation. It's really fun to come full circle and to be back here because this is really where I started my career. And I remember the names of those children. Anyway, so I will a little bit why assess in preschool, not much because I covered that in the last session, but really talk about use of data in a prevention-oriented framework. The whole idea is to prevent reading problems from occurring in the first place. Get kids on track, keep them on track. And so we will walk through a framework for using the data to make decisions. Now, among the people who are here, are any of you program level coordinators or supervisors? Classroom teachers? Coaches? Okay. Remind me what your roles are? Principals. Oh, okay. That's in that category of looking at systems level data. The reason I asked is because we look at the data at two different levels, for individual child, at the classroom, and at the systems level. And I'm going to show examples of doing that at all levels, and you really do want to look at both. If you're simply a classroom teacher looking at classroom data, you use the data to make changes, but guess what? If system-wide you have 40, 50, 60% of kids who are not on track, that's a systems level issue and maybe not just the issue in this one classroom. And so we may need to look at our curriculum and instruction at a systems level is the idea. And whatever you do as a classroom teacher is happening in the context of that system. So I will show both systems level data, individual child data. I will show data for the PELI. I will show it in our new platform, which is now called Acadience Learning Online, is no longer Acadience Data Management. And I don't know, are any of you familiar with Acadience Data Management and reports? Okay, a couple folks are. So for you, are you familiar with Acadience Learning Online? Oh, okay, so some folks have both. So we are transitioning PELI to Acadience Learning Online. It's not being administered and scored online yet, but instead of entering data when you do it manually into Acadience Data Management, you will enter your data into Acadience Learning Online and get Acadience Learning Online kinds of reports. Okay, that's the idea. So let's launch into this here. Oh, let me go back. Why assess? I mentioned the word prevention, and so it truly, at the preschool level, we want to prevent reading problems from coming about in the first place. And a couple of weeks ago when I was at IDA, International Dyslexia Association Conference, truly, people who truly may be identified with dyslexia will always have dyslexia, but you know what? We can prevent the severity of the reading disability if we start early and get kids on track and continue to keep kids on track. Those kids may continue to need some support, but we can really minimize the impact of that disability. And then for a lot of kids who actually don't have dyslexia, we want to get them on track and keep them on track and reduce the risk of reading problems later. There are some kids for whom we get them on track at the end of pre-K, and they've got the foundational skills, they have intact language skills, they come from good environments, they get good instruction, and they're fine. There are going to be some kids in pre-K that we do that, get them on track, and for whatever reasons, confounding speech-language delay, behavior, neurodiversity of some type, they're going to continue to need some support throughout. And so we want to start in preschool, get kids on track, entering kindergarten, and then it's up to kindergarten to keep them on track. Really, Dr. Good, Roland Good, and I started with this whole notion of preventing. And if we want to prevent reading problems, we need to assess early. We have to teach the essential skills, which I talked about in the last session, and we have to use the data, which is what this session is actually about. I showed a version of this slide in the last session. This is just grades 1 and 2, I believe. And it shows all the kids in that particular school in that grade who were on the average. That's the green trajectories, learning trajectories of reading. And the red lines are all of those children who are on the bottom 10% of kids. And this is just first and second grade. And you can see that tease out a little bit more. And see this gray box here? This is where we started our work. We need to downward extend this because we can't tell these kids apart. Even in the middle of first grade. What can we do in kindergarten? And then what can we do in preschool? Back it up even further. As I said earlier, those differences in precursors to reading trajectories start earlier than even kindergarten. And this is, again, the photo I showed, a grandmother and an infant. And I will tell you, I know this photo is 35 years old, because this infant is my older daughter, and that is her grandmother, my mother-in-law. And my daughter is now 35 and is a National Park Service ranger. So that's how I know that. Here is the sort of Hart and Risley slide showing those differences to precursors in reading trajectories beginning that young. As kids are listening to words spoken to them and then starting to learn to speak words, there are differences in trajectories in different groups of children depending upon the language experiences they have in the home. So I won't spend a lot of time talking about that. The essential skills in preschool: vocabulary, oral language, comprehension, so language, both expressive and receptive, alphabet knowledge, phonological awareness. So the PELI assesses all of those skills. And why those skills? Well, they're predictive of later reading outcomes. We can teach those things to kids even at the preschool age. There are many, many developmentally appropriate, fun ways to teach these skills. And we know when we teach these things, it improves reading outcomes for kids and prevents reading difficulties from happening in the first place. So, the model we use for decision making, and those of you who are familiar with Acadience Reading K6 are familiar with this model. I'm going to take it down and apply it to preschool and show you how we use PELI data within this model. If this is new to you, follow along. But no, it's not new to you. Anybody this picture is new to? Oh, you're familiar with this one. Excellent, excellent. The story I will tell about this one is that it's a spin-off, and maybe you've heard myself or Roland say this, from the problem-solving model, which came from the school psychology program where I got my PhD. And problem-solving model never quite sat right with me because problem-solving model steps are identify a problem, validate that it's a problem, figure out how you're going to solve the problem, do it. Is the problem solved? And the reason, as an early childhood person, I loved the notion of systematic steps. No matter what the issue is, we have a framework, a model to follow to answer the questions, get the data we need. But I never liked the focus on problems. And so Roland and I looked at, at preschool, what do we want to do? We want to identify the outcome. Where do we want kids to be? Because we know if we can get them there, they're on track for being successful. And so if we want them there, let's identify need for support to get there. We're not identifying a problem, we're identifying need for support to get to an outcome that's been validated to be a good outcome for kids. Then we plan the support, we implement the support, and then instead of step number 4, instead of saying we're monitoring progress and their response to intervention, it's really what it is, but we don't call it that. We're evaluating and modifying the support. The emphasis in this model is on the support because just like the skills, that's the thing we as teachers can do something about, right? We can change it up, do something if it's not working. So our focus, and I don't think it's just a semantic sort of difference in language. I think it's really important to think in these terms. And as we do this, as I consult with schools and we talk about what support are kids getting, how do we need to change the support, that's where the emphasis is on our intervention, our curriculum, the support, how we're doing it, small group, large group, whole class. And those are the variables we can change around. So for each one of those steps, if you're familiar with that model, identify need for support, validate, plan it, evaluate it, review outcomes, there are questions that go along with that. And you can see both at a systems level and at a individual student level. A systems level, most of the data I will show you will be at school level data. Student level data, I'll show you some data for individual children, PELI data, and some data at the classroom level, because that's the level that teachers will be looking at. Those of you who are reading coaches, principals, it's important to also be familiar with that student level data if you're in providing instructional support to the teachers, to the teaching staff. If you're a classroom teacher, it's important to have some sense of the system because what you're doing in your classroom resides in the context of this system. So my plan is to go through each of those steps and show you some PELI data and what it looks like and how you might use it to make some decisions. Okay? Any questions before I launch into these steps? What questions? What questions do you have before I launch? Let's talk about step 1, identifying need for support. And identifying need for support is up there in the very top. And this is our screening, the thing we're going to do. And in the last session, I said we recommend you do the PELI 3 times a year, beginning of year, middle of year, end of year, for all students. And part of the reason for doing all students is that we can use that data at the systems level to see how we're doing as a system. If we don't have all kids 3 times a year, we can't make that systems level decision. So that's the top is identifying need for support at the beginning of our model there. And the questions you can see here are these. At the systems level, are there children who may need some support? And by support, all kids, of course, need support. Are there kids, long form is, who need additional instructional support or different instructional support in order to achieve these outcomes, is the long version of it, and how many? And then at the student level, well then, which kids are they? Who are they? That's what you want to know. So I'm going to show you some of these Acadience Learning Online visuals, some of the things we may get to see. And I do have it pulled up behind my presentation so that I can try to click through it and show you some things that I mean. But we're going to look at a school level. There is this school, Bright Spring School. And at the systems level, are there children who may need support? How many? And in Acadience Data Management, we had a little pie chart. Most people are familiar with the pie chart. Here we use what we call a half donut or a bridge, but it's the same idea. It's color-coded, and the proportion of students red who are well below the benchmark, yellow have scores below the benchmark, green scores at the benchmark, blue above the benchmark. So this year we have launched a blue zone above the benchmark for PELI. It wasn't there in Acadience Data Management. The Acadience Data Management reports just had red, yellow, green. We now have an above benchmark zone for PELI. And the cool thing about Acadience Learning Online, once the data's in there, and for folks who are used to the static reports, it's a new learning. And because this is a static slide, I can't do it. But if I were right there, I just touch this red, and it will pop up how many students and what proportion of students that is. So, look, about a third of the students in this school, there are 2 classrooms out of the 32, about a third of the students are coming into preschool, their 4-5 year, with scores well below the benchmark, and this is the composite score. Now, if I was in Acadience Learning Online, I could touch this, and it will tell me who they are. So if you're a principal, an administrator, a supervisor, a coach, boom, that's who it is. And you can see that 5 children have scores and what proportion that is below the benchmark, what proportion have scores at the benchmark, what proportion of students or kids have scores well above the benchmark starting the year. Now this tells you those numbers, but you can just look at the graph. And are there kids who may need support just by looking at it? Well, is there red and yellow? Yeah, there is. There may be some children who need some additional or different support to get to those outcomes. And you can see it's roughly half and half. And you can see that in that picture where that line is between red, yellow, blue, green. So about half the kids coming into Bright Spring School in these 2 classrooms are scoring below or well below the benchmark. And I will tell you the data is real data from a real school districts. So system is the context. And as I just said, half the kids have scores below or well below, half have scores above, well above. What does that tell us about need for support? What else do we need to know as coaches, as principals, as supervisors, administrators? Yes?
Your point in the last session about for the ones who are that you're most concerned about to do the mid-check to see, because we see a lot in early childhood. If you have a child who's coming in at 3 or 4 and has never had another group situation, but they're doing okay developmentally, they may go Zoom. And so it may look different quickly. So that would be one of the big questions I would have if I was an administrator, whether how much is a need for extra and how much is just a need for instruction.
Yes, and so to recap really quickly, that was great. How much, and that is indeed in preschool. A lot of kids come in with low skills. Some of them are going to do just fine, put them in the classroom. Some of them are not. Even if you have really good instruction and activities going on, there are still going to be some kids who are going to need more. But this initial beginning of year screening may not tell you who. But as we walk through these decisions, we'll look at how we might use that midpoint to check up on kids. The other thing, this is all the composite score.
I want to see too, what skills do all the kids need help and support with?
Yes.
I want to look at that for that data too.
Yes, and so you'd want to look at specific skills. What skills do most kids need support with? Are there some who don't need as much, some skill areas? And look by skill area, and that is what you'd want to do. This is indeed the composite score. And about need for support, it tells me, just looking at about half our kids, we may need to make sure that once we look at the skills, well, do we have supports for the teachers to do this, support kids in these areas? So those are systems level decisions. Now this is the Acadience Learning Online version of a class report, and it provides the same information. Students, down the line here, you've got your composite score, and on the PELI you also have a language index. So the language index is a composite that is a combination of vocabulary, oral language, and comprehension, and then the individual subtest measures: alphabet knowledge, vocabulary, oral language, comprehension, and phonological awareness. And when it's very similar to the Acadience Data Management Report, those of you who are familiar with it, because it's color-coded, red, yellow, green, blue. At a glance, you can look at it, and if I see a lot of red and yellow, I can say, well, who are the kids who may need support, right? And I can look at it and I can see in which skill areas kids may need support and which kids may need what support. Yes?
I have a question. So we moved to the Acadience Online Learning, and it's really hard to navigate that system compared to the old system. We cannot figure out how to get this report.
The class report.
The class
report. It takes some playing around. Our customer support folks should be able to help you with that really easily. It always takes me some time to play around with it, and once I find it, it's like, oh, that's how you do it. But I will give that feedback because I sometimes have to play around. Once I figure it out, it's easy. Were you going to say something, Sherry, about that? Yeah, so our customer support folks can help you. They will do a session with you. They will walk you through it. They'll show you exactly how to do it because it is important to get here. You start with the half donuts, don't you, at the dashboard. And off the top of my head, I can't tell you exactly how to do it. I'll play around at the end here and see if we can get there. But I also don't have my iPad with me. On which I do it, but it really does provide the same information. Those of you familiar with Acadience data management, it's just done differently, and you have to navigate to it. The cool thing is that it's just more dynamic and interactive, and you could sit and click on an individual child. It'll pull up that child's report. You change from looking at the composite score to looking at an individual measure and see how that changes. So it's dynamic, and that's a very cool thing. But learning to navigate it is its own thing. But that's the general idea for identifying need for support, the initial screening. And those are the two broad screens that we look at, those half donuts at the systems level. You also can get, if you find your way to it, a half donut for an individual classroom teacher. This is generally more meaningful to me at a classroom level where you only have however many, 12, 15, 20 kids, because you actually can see who they are and going across what their needs are. But we always, as we do with Acadience Reading K6, validate need for support. Are we confident in the accuracy of our data overall and for individual students? And at the systems level, here's the thing. The quality of the decisions we make is only as good as the data we collect. So those of you who are supervisors, principals, when you look at the systems level data, and then you can drill down, does it look as you generally expect it to, or are there some discrepancies that are unexpected? And we look at this like, this discrepancy doesn't make sense. Or why does this classroom look really different from this classroom? Who were the assessors? And so then that brings me to some other questions. Has everybody received training? Are they actually doing it right and scoring it correctly? And has anybody checked the accuracy of their data that was entered into it? Because at some point you just want to have eyes on that data. And does it look the way you sort of expect. Now, obviously, these are little kids. There may be a specific child who, I'm surprised that he did that well or didn't do better than that. Yeah. So you can run that to ground. But at a systems level, are there things that really look out of whack? And then run those things to ground, because the decisions you make are only as good as the data. The same thing at that individual class child level. This surprises me that this child did this well or this poorly. It's not consistent with what I see from this child in the classroom, in the activities, with a parent report. And so that what might have caused that performance, a bad day, is it an assessment issue of not being administered correctly? Is the child sick that day? So you want to run those things to ground if there's something a little out of whack. So you just validate it pretty simply. I often do it with teachers. We just sit and look at their class list. How does this look? Anybody look, and if teachers have other information, they bring it. And if there's a child that's unexpected, we run it to ground, look at the other data we have. We might do a quick check in that particular skill area. Then we move into using the data to plan what it is we're going to do. And these are our questions at the systems level. And it gets to your question or point, Sherry, well, at what age levels? Here we've got 3, 4, 4, 5. We have different expectations. In what skill areas might we need some support for a lot of kids? And if that's the case, what's our system-wide plan? Like, we've got a lot of kids who are scoring really low on phonological awareness. Well, does our curriculum cover it? Do the teachers know how to teach it? Do they know what it is? And then at the individual child level, student level, well, this individual child, what are their skills? What are their strengths? What are their needs? And what are we going to do for this particular child, including our goals for kids, how we're going to group them for instruction, and what we're going to do about progress monitoring. So we're back to our half donut, and this was the composite score that we saw earlier, right? That shows roughly half the kids at or above benchmark, half the kids below or well below the benchmark. We can look at each individual measure. We can look at the language index. Well, language index is pretty close to the composite score, roughly half and half. Maybe a few more kids are on track. And we can look, I didn't print out all the half donuts, but we can look at each one of those areas: alphabet knowledge, vocabulary, oral language, comprehension, phonological awareness. Each one of them will have a half donut that you can look at your systems level. And as you look across here, which skill area do you have the largest number of kids who may need support? And I guess you can look across both red and yellow. Yeah, it looks like phonological awareness, vocabulary, oral language, comprehension pretty high. What skill area do the kids seem to be coming in like strong? Alphabet knowledge. These kids are coming in strong for whatever reason. They know their letter names. So we don't know. Is this a community where coming into pre-K, there's some kind of public service campaign, teach your kids letter names coming in? Or is this a program where you have 3 4s, 4 5s? At the 3 4 range, they're doing a really great job of that's the thing they're teaching, but not teaching those other things. So there's some context here we don't know, but you'd want to know that, oh yeah, so that we're doing that with 3 4s, but we're not doing phonological awareness. We don't have a real strong program to build language, vocabulary, comprehension. Maybe we need to, if this is a 3 4 4 5 program, maybe we need to start to build that in 3-4 program and carry it on into 4-5. We're clearly going to need some supports in this area again. What do we have in this area? What support do our teachers need to promote these skills at a system-wide level? Because there are a lot of kids who need some support. Anybody in here work for Head Start or work with Head Start? Somebody asked me recently, one of our people on my staff, like, so Ruth, this systems level data, can you tell me how this applies, to Head Start? And I say, do you want your kids to enter kindergarten on track to learn to read? Our benchmarks are based on that predictive probabilities. And we don't say, oh, no, I know, yeah, I get it. The kids in that program have risk factors. But that doesn't mean we say, oh, we don't have to hit those benchmarks. It means this is really an opportunity to look at your system, look at what you have, and get them there. And what are we as a group? How do we do that? How do we support the teachers to do that? And so my staff person said, oh, okay. It's like, no, don't. It's it's Head Start, or oh, it's a program that serves a lot of English learners. Oh, it's okay. It's okay if you only get 50% of kids to benchmark. Get as many kids as you can to benchmark. Our benchmarks on the PELI, as with Acadience Reading K6, are what we call the lowest level of okay, that put the odds in kids' favor of getting to the next one, and getting to kindergarten on track. So get as many kids as possible there. If kids are close, get them to blue, because what we know with young kids, and we do have research to support that, if they're at blue, they are much more likely to stay, and if they drop, they're still at the benchmark. And especially the kids who come in with some risk factors over that summer, if they're not in programs, those are the kids who lose the most. We saw the same thing during the pandemic. The kids who lost the most were the young kids and the kids who came in with risk factors. So do everything you can to get as many kids as possible to green or blue is the idea. And so we know, again, about 3/4 of the kids are coming in for whatever reason, knowing their letter names. Well, that's great. You've got something. That tells me there are a batch of kids here, if you teach it, they learn it. Do you know what I mean? That there are kids who can learn these things if we teach them. A lot of kids coming in low on phonological awareness, but I have to tell you, given that info on letter knowledge, I'm thinking we teach phonological awareness, we're going to get a batch of kids who are going to just bump up on that pretty quickly. I'm not that concerned about it. I am concerned about the language, the large number of kids with low language skills, and for those kids, I'm more concerned about their phonological awareness because the way those things are interrelated. Phonological awareness is often seen in the decoding thread, but it is really a language skill, and so it is linked to kids' knowledge of words. So this is what this systems level data is telling me. And does our system, does what we currently do provide some supports for teachers to provide differentiated instruction or learning activities focused here? That's what the data at the systems level can help you to do. And the same thing as a teacher at a classroom level. This is that same report. And I think the name of this classroom, I can't remember. It is a classroom at Bright Springs School, but I'm looking at children's strengths, needs, plan for support. How do I do this? Look at this range. Everything red to blue, on the composite score, and kind of a mix. Some kids who are yellow but are green in some skills, green, red in some skills. Like, whoa, how do we manage that? Those of you who are coaching teachers, how do you help them to use the data in their classroom to make some good decisions? And again, the point of doing the PELI is to use the data. We have a tool that is our grouping worksheet for the PELI, and it is different from the K6 one. We have 3 areas. We have our language index, we have phonological awareness, and alphabet knowledge. Acadience Learning Online does not yet populate this for you, but this tool is available for our PELI mentors on the website. And if you're a supervisor, a coach, a principal, you can sit with your teachers. And I have to tell you, I think there is something that's useful for teachers actually writing names in and populating this, not just getting it printed out. Because as they're writing the names of these kids, they're thinking about the kids. Like, oh, yeah, this makes sense. This doesn't. And there's just a different level of thinking about it when you actually do it. Now, ultimately, ALO will populate this initial grouping for you. But I have to tell you, I don't think it takes that long to do, and it's really valuable. And the idea is simply this. We take those areas, the language index there, language index vocabulary, oral language and comprehension, and I just popped those areas in here to show you the kids who have scores well below the benchmark on the language index, and then what their scores are on those two measures. You see a whole lot of red here. The kids who score below the benchmark, the kids who score at or above the benchmark. This form is not yet changed, but we've split them out here, kids at or above. And there's quite a range here in this classroom. So we're going to take this data, and this is initial grouping suggestions, and it seems to me there is a line that pops up there. Even in that initial group, that lowest performing kids with scores well below the benchmark, you know what, there's a gap there. Some of those kids are bumping up against the yellow zone, but we've got 3 kids with really low scores. So even within that group, we may not group all those kids together. We may, but we may not. Do you know what I mean? You have to, if you're a classroom teacher, you have to figure that out. If you're a consultant, you have to help the classroom teacher figure out the best way to group students based on this data and the other things you know about these children. So that has happened, and there is no right or wrong way to do it. In this classroom, they've decided they can't do 5 groups or 6 groups. They just don't have the resources to do that. Who does? So they divide the kids into 4 groups. They do keep the 3 lowest performing kids together in group 1. They have those 3 other kids who are well below the benchmark, and they bump Nick to that lower group. Do you know what I mean? So they did some shuffling. You know, you get kids whose scores fall into a zone like yellow, but there are some kids in the yellow zone who really are very much more like kids with scores right here below that cut point, right? There are some kids with scores in the yellow zone whose scores are much more like kids bumping up against the green. So in this classroom, that's what they did. And this is the way they landed with 4 different groups. And at their language grouping time, whenever they fit that into their daily schedule, and because at one point in my career we were developing some Tier 2 and Tier 3 language interventions. They were storybook-based interventions done in small group, slightly different activities depending upon different levels of kids. And so you might have a teacher doing that work for 15, 20 minutes, however long those groups go. And you might have an assistant, a volunteer, you know, moving around through these other 2 groups. You might have some centers. You might have something called a work table, a station, a center, whatever you call them. The other way I've seen it done is teachers doing this group and is monitoring group 4 over there, and the kids know that center activity and what to do while this volunteer or instructional aide is running this group and monitoring this group. A variety of ways to try to run small groups. I know it's not an easy thing. I have consulted in early childhood classrooms that never ever did small groups, and we had to help them to figure out how to do that. Did you have a comment about that?
It's the bane of mine.
It's the bane of your existence. Yeah.
I will not do small groups. It's so important to be able to do the focused instruction.
It's so important to be able to do the focused instruction. And, you know, if you want to use the data to actually improve outcomes, this is what I'm saying. Use it in part to do this and then figure out how to do it. And it's no easy thing if you've never done it. I've also worked with those teachers. And And this, if it's done well, but I have to tell you, it takes teaching kids how to do this. You know, it takes teaching kids how to rotate. It takes teaching them how to do these activities independently. And so, yes, so you're nodding. So you know this. It doesn't mean just set it up and then expect kids to do it, right? So there's a whole lot that goes into this management to get here. And teachers need support to be able to do that and to be able to use the data if we really want to change outcomes for kids. I've done it, I've modeled it. One of my favorite examples was a kid. This wasn't an early childhood teacher, but it applies to early childhood. It was a kindergarten teacher. And kids came in, and that first week, she taught them all those routines. Okay, boys and girls, when you come in, you're going to do this. Try it. Come back, try it. Now, we're going to be sitting at circle, and now when I ring the bell, you can go to these centers, you know, and then when I ring the bell, you clean up, you help somebody else clean up, you come back here, let's try it. And she just spent the first week doing that, teaching kids the routines. And I worked with an early childhood teacher who knew that kindergarten teacher and said, well, I talked about how smoothly that kindergarten classroom ran, and I said, that's not just, didn't just happen because she said, okay, kids do this. She taught the kids the expectations. And then this teacher said, well, and you know where she sits. And I laughed. I said, don't you think that's also intentional? The circle time was, the kids were in the wall, and she was in a rocking chair that in order to run out of circle time, the kids would have to go past her. And I said, don't you think that the teacher, you know, sort of set that up intentionally that way? You know, it's just pretty interesting, the amount. And then for every one of these activities that kids are doing in group 2 and group 4, some time spent, not like 20 minutes, here's the activity. You might spend some time with the teacher doing those. Do you know what I mean? That could be something you do in group 1 with each group till kids are independently doing them. Now that becomes that activity. But I just want to say I know. I can put this slide and then get to here, but there's a ton that goes into getting from here to here if you really want to use the data. And that goes beyond this, this particular presentation. And the same thing we're doing for language skills we would do for letter naming and phonological awareness. Now, they are separate activities, but you might find kids who are low on both, and you might be able to find a mix where, yeah, we can do these sort of preliminary to decoding skills activities because they are the two components for building that understanding of the alphabetic principle. So that makes sense. Oh, they're a little high in this one. They really need this. It's okay. It doesn't hurt to put them together, teach both, and get them there. So, okay. We now move on to evaluating and modifying the support, and here's where we're monitoring progress. And again, I do know when we ask early childhood teachers to collect more data, monitor progress, we're asking to do something else on top of everything else they're doing. And that is, how do we do that? How do we help to structure so we can do some of that progress monitoring? And because what we want to know is what we're doing working? Is the support we're providing working? So are we making progress? I would strongly recommend that at a systems level, you have a systems-wide goal. If you have a preschool program, you're in an early childhood program, system-wide. What's our goal? We are starting the year system-wide with 40% of kids on track, by the end of this year. Maybe have a 3-year plan. By the end of this year, can we get 80% of kids on track? The next year, 90. The next is close to 100%. Do you know what I mean? A 3-year plan. And then within that system, if there are lots of schools, each school will be a little bit different. Oh, at our school, and I've actually worked at school age with this, well, our school, we already have 80% of kids on track. Because I said, well, why aren't you looking at your data, coming up with your plan? Well, if you're starting with 80% of kids on track, set a goal to get more than 80% on track by the end of the year. Who are those 20% of kids? That's not where you want to be. Come up with a goal. And then for each individual student, each individual child at the preschool level, are they making progress? So at a systems level, we could look at our data from beginning of year to middle of year to end of year, beginning of year to end of year. And what we want to see, similar to if this was a pie chart, we want to see less red, yellow, more blue, green, right? So just by eyeballing it, we can see that that is in fact happening here on the composite score. We do have more green, more blue. We still have some kids, but the beauty of it is it's the middle of the year, right? This is why you do a middle of the year data point. It's the middle of the year, so we have a whole half year to figure out who these kids are and what modifications we may need to make or can make. And it could be that even though they're still in the red or yellow zone, they actually are making a lot of progress. So we just say, stay the course. They're just not quite there, but they're all been making great progress. So just because somebody is still in the red zone doesn't mean they're not making great progress. So you have to look at individual students and their progress. And I think I've been jumping around here. That was the composite score. This particular report in Acadience Learning Online shows something slightly different still with these bridges. And I really like this view because if we want to see, well, for which kids is what we're doing working, this is of the children who came in to the 4-5 year well below the benchmark, where are they at the middle of the year? And if I were in ALO, I can touch this and I would know who they are. But there were 10 kids. Well, it looks like 5 of them by middle of year have moved up. 1 has moved up to below benchmark. 4 of them have moved up to benchmark. Yay. 5 kids haven't, but it's still middle of year. Who are they? What kind of progress have they made? Oh, they're actually making progress. They're almost there. Oh, nope, they're still at 0. What do we want to do about that? Of the kids who came in with scores below the benchmark, where are they at middle year? Oh, look, there were 5 of them. All 5 of them have moved up. Their scores are now at benchmark or above. Of the students who came in with scores at benchmark, where are they at middle of year? There were 6 of them. Well, 3 of them have bumped up to be above benchmark. 1 of them is still at benchmark. 2 kids, scores, who are they? You know, did we miss them because they came in at benchmark and we didn't? Or did they come in at benchmark and then miss a lot of school, got sick? Whatever. You know, who are they? And then of the kids who came in with scores above the benchmark, where are they at middle of year? There were 11 kids, and those 11 kids still have scores above the benchmark. Yay. At least we're not losing some kids. And so systems level, if you're a systems level person looking at that data, it helps you to make those decisions. Now we can look, I pulled out 2 specific skill areas beginning to middle of year because I want you to see that there are some differences. And you can see, remember I said on phonological awareness, I think given what I see in this data, all these kids coming in knowing letter names, we teach it. There are going to be a batch of kids who learn it. And look at this. So we now have almost all the kids on phonological awareness by the middle of year have scores at or above the benchmark. Who are these kids, right? Vocabulary oral language, we're not seeing that kind of change. What are we doing in this area of vocab oral language? How do we have a half a year to go. What do we do system-wide to support our teachers to focus on this area? So at the classroom level, we can do the same thing. And I think this is the beginning of year data that we looked at already at the classroom level. A lot of red, a lot of yellow beginning of year. And as we look at that classroom report at the middle of the year, there's still some red, but look, you can see for individual children, a whole lot more yellow, green, blue, right? So we can look what skill areas, which kids, change around our groupings if we need to, based, again, on the data and what the data is telling us. There may be some children that you want to do some individual progress monitoring with. Maybe you're going to set aside a really small group with 2 or 3 kids who really need some intensive support and do with 10 minutes a day with them. And so what materials are you going to use? What are you, both for instruction, for providing that support, and for how you're going to monitor their progress. And this is an area in which we might use the PELI quick checks. Now this shows vocabulary oral language quick check for Daphne. And Daphne is a child who came in at the beginning of the year. You can see, here's the cut point for risk, well below the benchmark, way down here. We didn't want to wait till January to do another check for Daphne. So we gave her an interim book, midway between. So about 6 weeks into the school year, beginning of November maybe, or end of October. It depends on when school started. And you can see, oh, great, Daphne's still in the red zone, but she's making progress. We come back in January. No progress from then. Now, is this just winter slump? If we were to test her 2 weeks later, is she bumped up? And I will tell you, with Daphne, what happened was this bump, initial bump, was really a child who has an expressive language delay, but just being in preschool, familiar with the activities, that was a real bump, still in the red zone. But when brought in the SLP for a consult, no, we need to provide some support for Daphne. This wasn't just a fluke. This wasn't just, winter break slump. This is actually real, so let's get her into an intervention program now. We're going to use the vocabulary oral language quick check. Here's where she is. Here's our benchmark at the end of the year where we want her to be. And we draw a line connecting her score to that goal, if you will. We do our language intervention, and it was a storybook-based intervention with activities to build core vocabulary, not tier 2 words for Daphne, core vocabulary, basic words, getting her to increase her language from single words to 2 words to 3 words, and we use those quick checks to monitor her progress. And I am actually, what I'm going to do is show you what that looked like. And I think I pulled up, we don't have this data all into Acadience Learning Online yet. So I am going to my sort of old training slides to show what we did with Daphne and what this looks like and using the quick checks for her. So that's the vocabulary oral language quick check. This is vocabulary oral language quick check number 1. You can see an array of pictures, same mix of hard, easy, medium words as on the subtest of the PELI itself, so it's interchangeable with the PELI. And those were the words, and this is how Daphne did. And the words that are circled are the words that she named. The ones that are slashed are words that she didn't name correctly. Words that are underlined are words that she said something indicating she has some knowledge of that word. Over here, on the tell about, you can see how she did, and her scores are 0s or 1s, I believe. There's 2s. 0s, 1s, and 2s. You can see exactly what she said, what she did, what she named. And again, the intervention was really focused on basic vocabulary and getting her to use those words. And when she used them, if she said a single word, getting her to extend that to 2 words. If she said a simple phrase, getting her to extend that. So we plot that. If you're into data, and I would do it, I would put the X. I'm old school. Something I like about those paper pencil. Next quick check has these pictures and words, and here's how she did, named 6 words. And you can see her scores on the tell about and exactly what she said, still single words, couple of 2-word utterances, she's still gesturing. We plot that data point. She's on the line. We do another quick check, named 7 words, and you can see what she said right on it. She's still doing some gesturing, eat with it cold. So you see how she's doing here. We plot that data point. it's middle between spring and end of the year. She also had low skills in phonological awareness and alphabet knowledge. She was low across the board. We're going to give her another book. Here's how she does, and you can see how she did on all of the measures, including the vocab oral language. And then we bring her back and you look at her data and she's on track, right? So that's just an example of use of the quick checks and what that might look like for Daphne. And now I'll get back here and review outcomes. And you know what? When we review outcomes, all the data sources you've already looked at, you get to use again. Beginning of year, middle of year, end of year. We got a lot of our kids, right, to the benchmark and above. A few kids we didn't. We can look back, what happened with them, how close were they. They might have made great progress, just not quite there. But I'd say this is generally a pretty darn good picture of progress at a systems, at a school level. This is looking at beginning of year to end of year. And you can see by the end of year, the kids who started well below the benchmark, there's only one student who still has a score well below the benchmark. So I have to tell you, kids who move from below the benchmark, well below to below, even though they're still below, it's enough to close the gap. As long as they get to kindergarten and the kindergarten teacher continues to close the gap, because that's the point. It's not just making progress, enough progress to close the gap. So for 9 out of 10 of these kids, enough progress to close the gap. All the kids here have moved up. All the kids here are still at benchmark or above. Everybody who came in above has stayed above. That is a nice picture at the systems level, and you can look at it at the classroom level, and Daphne is no longer the lowest performing student. And who is this student here? Is this Oscar? It's small, I can't see. What happened to Oscar? You know, how did we miss Oscar? What happened? What's his story? I don't know, but overall in the classroom, a whole lot of these kids in this classroom have moved, made great progress. So Oscar, what happened? Let's look at him. What could we do differently for next year? And this is that same idea that I just showed you with Daphne. You know, only this one is putting the whole model together, making database decisions, and actually using the data. This child, instead of vocab oral language, is going into a small phonological awareness group because by November was still at 0. We do the same thing, draw the line, put a line. This child is in a PA intervention group. Maybe there was only 2 kids in that group, and we start to monitor progress. And you can see some going up, some going down, but generally hanging around on that line, right? That's telling us that, yeah, this intervention is working. Now, if it didn't look like that, if this data was out here, guess what? We'd want to look at what's going on. And do we need to change something else? You know, do we need to change the intervention? Do we need to work one-on-one? It's behavior. The child is in the group. It's a group of 3, but this child is actually under the chair, under the table, not really paying attention. So maybe we do need to work with this child one-on-one if the data were different. But it's the whole point of collecting the data is to use the data so that we can get kids on track when they enter kindergarten, and we build futures for these kids by changing their outcomes and where they enter kindergarten. And you didn't say a lot, and I walked through the model and the different decisions, but please, I am open to questions, comments, thoughts, because we can go in depth on any of these things more if you have questions. I also do have this pulled up now. It's not on my iPad, so this is live. This is the whole district, not just Bright Spring School. This is the whole district, but you can see I hover over this, And in the school, there are 92 children, so that's not the school in the district. There may be 3 schools, a number of classrooms. There are 92 students overall. But I just do this like, oh, look, 28% of the students are well below the benchmark, above, and it just tells me how many are in each of those categories, middle of year, end of year. I can change this somehow, and this is where I have to play around with it too. I can change this to, I don't want all schools. I want pre-K 4, 5. No, I don't want district-wide. Oh, took me back out. Darn it. I'm playing around. This is the issue. Sometimes once I figure out how to get there, I thought maybe I'll just be able to get there to that class list report, and I didn't. Yes.
I'm just wondering, and you may not have the data to answer this question, is how common is it to have these classrooms compared to many, it seemed like they were sort of dichotomous. Quite a large number of children well below and quite a large number well above. And frequently in a public school, that wouldn't surprise me at all. In childcare, a lot of times we have the childcare that draws from this group of people and the Head Start program that draws from this group of people. And I was just wondering whether this is pretty common to have the both ends or not.
I think you're right. A lot of the first users of PELI and the ones in our data system, which is where this data come from, a particular school that gave us permission to blind their data, that wasn't the real name of the school, not the real, was a public school pre-K program. That particular pre-K program, because they actually entered demographic data, I knew also had a large number of English learners. So those low vocab oral language skills that we saw and not that much movement from beginning to middle of the year, because I saw the demographic data, I knew that there were. Somewhere I have the data. There's another school that looked really different and doesn't have a large number of English learners. And their data looked really different in terms of that vocab oral language and their language index. They had a lot more kids on track on that language index. So it really does vary depending upon, and the same thing is true with K-6, right? You know, what we see in particular entering K, wide range, which is, and I will also reiterate, it doesn't mean lower the benchmarks. It does mean, though, how in this early childhood program, where we're not dealing with public school teachers, all with, bachelor's, some with master's degrees, some of whom still haven't learned about teaching literacy, but a different group of teachers, too, who don't have even that level of training. How do we support them to support these kids? I think that's a big piece of it. It's huge, and so, and that goes beyond. That goes beyond what I can.
An assessment isn't going to fix it.
An assessment, but understanding using the data really is important. And I've been doing this work for a long time. And I actually thought when we did the Acadience Reading K6, formerly Dibbles, people would come up and say, "Ruth, thank you so much. We've been waiting for this." And what they would do is, at the break, they'd come up and say, "Dr. Kaminsky, we get it. We get the importance of assessment, but what do we do? How do we do that?" And I do think the assessment can be a catalyst for change, but you gotta look at the data. You gotta put yourself in that hard place, like, oh, it doesn't look good, and you gotta do it in a way that we're all in this together and supportive of our teachers. I worked with one principal who used to go to her kindergarten teachers and say, "These are your kids. What are you going to do about it?" And it was like, "No, these are our kids. what are we going to do about it? And I've worked with administrators who get that and look at the data like, ooh, this doesn't look good, does it? You know, can you help us figure out how to help our teachers to do what they need to do? Which is also why I laid out at least a 3-year plan for setting goals, you know, a 3 to 5 year plan, because you don't go from having 40% of kids on track, 50% of kids on track, to 100% of kids on track in 1 year. And very few get actually 100% of kids on track. I mean, kids get sick, kids miss, you know, but get as many as possible on track. But but it doesn't mean don't pay attention to the data. It's just one of those hard things. Like, I don't want to look at it because what it's telling me isn't good. Or then I don't want to look at it, it doesn't look good, so I don't believe it. Because I know these kids need to play more, or I know whatever. And finding ways to support teachers is key. But using the data, helping you to target those areas one piece at a time, whether it's language, whether it's bringing in a PA program. And I've seen folks do that. Okay, let's target this. Let's bring in this, teach teachers to do this. And like, oh, this one thing. And it starts. And then as teachers start to see kids make change in one area, sometimes they start being eager, like, oh, I didn't know. Now what about these kids who are low here? So it's the wraparound support that teachers are going to need to actually use the data is crucial.
The grouping worksheets are really helpful for teachers, especially those who aren't used to looking at data, to start to think about, okay, I have the data now, what can I do with it? And I think it really helps teachers to start asking questions and exploring how to use it.
So that comment was about the grouping worksheets and how just that simple step helps teachers to start to think about children in this way and skills. And there are all of the issues around grouping children homogeneously based on needs that some people have a hard time with, but there is so much evidence that's the most efficient way to get impact, to really target the needs of a particular group of children.
And it's as they said, just because you've got this group that's low language and needs extra language doesn't mean that they also aren't the wizards in the block area. And so that's the fact that we put people in groups not by what they need to learn during this piece, but because, I had a teacher once, the problem I have with the redbirds and the bluebirds is that the buzzards know that they're the buzzards. And you don't want to make the kid, you don't want to make it look like that.
Of course not. And you're exactly right. If you group in this way for this, there are other areas where you're not, and you're mixing kids with the low language with kids with language skills so that they're not in the same group all day, and we don't call them buzzards. Crows, I know. No, I came through school myself as a child where there were redbirds, bluebirds, and I don't, it was very clear. And no, we're talking group for this, and then it gets mixed up for other activities. So good point, and thank you for saying that. Well, I would encourage you to encourage folks who were at the first session who didn't come to using data to watch the video, because it's not about the assessment and doing it. And this looks like a fun assessment, we'll do this. This is really the critical piece, is looking at the data you get and doing something about it. So encourage your colleagues to do that. And I'll hang around for a little while for those of you who may have questions but didn't want to ask. But remember, I am the author. You can ask anything. The good, the bad, the ugly. I will do my best to answer it. And if I don't know the answer, I'll make it up, because I'm the author. Thank you all. Good luck, Patton, and you do great work.
Thank you, Ruth.